The freezing winter wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of smoke and gunpowder as Ruby Callahan stood before the smoldering remains of her family's homestead, clutching nothing but a tattered shawl around her shoulders. Everything she had ever known or loved had been reduced to ashes in a single night of violence, leaving her with nothing but the ragged clothes on her back and a heart full of grief. Colorado Territory, 1873. The promises of a new life out west had turned to dust for 20-year-old Ruby. Her parents had moved their family from Boston 3 years earlier, seeking fortune in the silver mines and building a modest but comfortable home on the edge of the frontier. Now, they were gone victims of the savage border violence that occasionally erupted between settlers and desperate outlaws. Ruby's face was streaked with soot and tears as she knelt in the snow, her fingers tracing the charred wood of what had once been her father's handcrafted rocking chair. The bandits had taken everything of value: the silver, her mother's jewelry, even the horses. They'd left Ruby for dead, unconscious from a blow to the head before setting fire to the house. By some miracle, she had awakened and escaped the flames, only to find herself utterly alone. Miss, are you hurt?" The deep voice startled her, and Ruby whirled around, grabbing a piece of charred wood as her only defense. A tall man sat atop a chestnut stallion 20 yards away, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. His broad shoulders were dusted with snow, and his long coat billowed slightly in the wind. A rifle was holstered at his side, but his hands remained visible on the reins. "Stay back," Ruby warned, her voice hoarse from smoke and crying. "I have nothing left to steal." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "I am not here to take anything, miss. I saw the smoke from miles away." He removed his hat, revealing kind eyes set in a weathered face. "Name's Samuel Blackwood. I have a ranch about 5 miles east of here." Ruby did not lower her makeshift weapon. "The Blackwood Ranch, I have heard of it," Samuel nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "And this was the Callahan place, wasn't it?" His eyes scanned the destruction. "What happened here?" "Bandits," Ruby said, the word bitter on her tongue. "They came in the night, my parents." Her voice broke and she looked away. Samuel's expression darkened. "The Reeves gang, they've been terrorizing homesteads up and down the territory." He took a tentative step forward. "Miss Callahan, you cannot stay here. Night will fall soon, and the temperature with it." Ruby clutched her shawl tighter, acutely aware of how inadequate it was against the biting cold. "I have nowhere to go." "My ranch is not far," Samuel offered, his voice gentle but firm. "We have a bunkhouse where our cook lives." "She's a kind woman. You would be safe there until you decide what to do next." Ruby hesitated, eyeing the stranger warily. In Boston, a young woman would never consider accepting such an offer from a man she had just met. But this was not Boston, and these were not ordinary circumstances. Death awaited her in the cold night if she refused. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." Samuel's eyes, the color of a summer sky, met hers steadily. "Out here, we help our neighbors. It's how we all survive." He extended a gloved hand toward her. "Please, Miss Callahan, let me help you." After a moment's hesitation, Ruby dropped the charred wood and nodded. What choice did she have? Samuel approached slowly, removing his heavy coat and draping it over her shoulders. The warmth of it enveloped her immediately, carrying the scent of leather, horses, and pine. "Can you ride?" he asked, leading her toward his horse. Ruby nodded, thinking of her own mare, now stolen or dead. Samuel helped her mount, then swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance as he reached around to take the reins. As they rode away, Ruby could not bring herself to look back at the ruins of her former life. The journey to the Blackwood Ranch passed in silence, save for the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats on the snow-covered ground. Ruby sat rigid in the saddle, her mind numb with shock and grief. The landscape around them was stark but beautiful, rolling hills covered in snow, the distant mountains purple against the waning daylight. When they crested a rise, the Blackwood Ranch came into view. Unlike her family's modest homestead, this was a proper cattle operation. A large main house built of logs and stone dominated the property, with a barn, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings arranged around it. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and lanterns glowed in the windows against the approaching darkness. As they rode into the yard, a middle-aged woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression turned from curious to concerned when she spotted Ruby. "Samuel Blackwood, who have you brought home this time?" She called, though her tone was more worried than scolding. Samuel dismounted and helped Ruby down. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Ruby Callahan. The Reeves gang hit her family's homestead. She's the only survivor." Mrs. Winters' face softened immediately. "Oh, you poor child." She came forward, assessing Ruby with kind eyes. "You're half frozen and look ready to collapse. Come inside at once." Ruby found herself guided into the warmth of the kitchen, where a hearty stew bubbled on the stove. Mrs. Winters efficiently stripped away Samuel's coat and Ruby's sodden shawl, replacing them with a thick woolen blanket. Before she knew it, Ruby was seated at a wooden table with a bowl of steaming stew before her and a cup of hot coffee at her elbow. Samuel stood awkwardly by the door, his hat in his hands. "I need to see to my horse and let the men know about the Reeves gang. They might still be in the area," Mrs. Winters nodded. "Go on then, I'll take care of Miss Callahan." After Samuel left, Mrs. Winters sat across from Ruby. "Eat, child. You need your strength." Ruby picked up the spoon mechanically, taking a small bite. The rich flavor of the stew barely registered. "He said you're the cook here." "Housekeeper and cook," Mrs. Winters corrected. "I've been with the Blackwoods since Samuel was just a boy. His father hired me after his mother passed, God rest her soul. When Mr. Blackwood died 5 years ago, Samuel kept me on." She studied Ruby carefully. "Do you have any family elsewhere? Anyone we could send word to?" Ruby shook her head. "No one. My father's brother is somewhere in California, but we haven't heard from him in years." She set down her spoon, unable to continue eating despite her hunger. "I don't know what I'm going to do." Mrs. Winters reached across the table and patted Ruby's hand. "One step at a time, dear. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to think about what comes next." After the meal, Mrs. Winters showed Ruby to a small but clean bedroom off the kitchen. "This is my room, but I can bunk with the maid for a few nights." "I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Winters interrupted firmly. "You need privacy and rest." She rummaged in a trunk and pulled out a nightgown and some clothing. "These might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can see about getting you some proper things." Left alone, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the events of the day to wash over her. Sobs racked her body as she thought of her parents, of all they had built, of all they had lost. She cried until no more tears would come, then changed into the borrowed nightgown and crawled beneath the heavy quilt. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flames consuming her home, heard the gunshots that had taken her parents' lives. When dawn finally broke, Ruby had not slept more than an hour at a stretch. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, a plain brown skirt and cream-colored blouse that hung loosely on her slender frame, and ventured out to the kitchen. Mrs. Winters was already there, kneading dough at the large wooden table. "Good morning, Miss Callahan," she said, looking up. "I hope you managed some rest." "A little," Ruby lied, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "Please call me Ruby." "Ruby, then, and I'm Martha." The older woman gestured to a pot on the stove. "There's coffee and porridge keeping warm if you're hungry." Ruby poured herself a cup of coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I should leave today. I've imposed enough already." Martha stopped kneading and fixed Ruby with a stern look. "And where would you go, child, with winter setting in and no money or possessions to your name?" Ruby had no answer. The harsh reality of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. The back door opened, and Samuel entered, stamping snow from his boots. He wore a sheepskin coat over his work clothes, and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "Morning, Mrs. Winters, Miss Callahan." He nodded to Ruby, his expression careful, as though afraid she might shatter if he looked at her too directly. "Ruby," she corrected softly. "Please call me Ruby." A small smile touched his lips. "Ruby, then." He accepted a cup of coffee from Martha and turned to face her fully. "I rode out to your homestead at first light with 2 of my men. We took care of your parents." His voice was gentle. "Gave them a proper burial under that big elm tree. I hope that was all right." Tears welled in Ruby's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, deeply moved by this unexpected kindness. That was their favorite spot. My mother used to read there in the summer. Samuel nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. We also found this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out to Ruby. It was her mother's locket, a simple silver oval with a delicate etching of a rose on its face. Ruby reached for it with trembling fingers. I thought they had taken everything, she said, voice thick with emotion. This was my grandmother's. It must have fallen during the attack, Samuel explained. We found it near where your father was. Ruby clutched the locket to her chest, this one precious link to her past. I can never repay you for this. No repayment needed, Samuel said firmly. He hesitated, then continued. I've been thinking about your situation. Winter's coming on hard, and traveling would be dangerous even if you had somewhere to go. Ruby steeled herself, expecting to be asked to leave despite this observation. I propose you stay here, at least until spring, Samuel continued, surprising her. Mrs. Winters could use help with the household, especially with Christmas approaching and the extra hands we'll be taking on for the winter cattle work. Martha nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, an extra pair of hands would be most welcome. This place is too much for one old woman to manage. Ruby looked between them, suspicion mingling with desperate hope. You would give me work, a place to stay, honest work for fair compensation, Samuel confirmed. Room, board, and a small wage. Come spring, if you wish to move on, you'll have some money saved to help you start over. The offer was more than generous, it was life-saving. Pride warred briefly with necessity in Ruby's heart, but necessity won. I accept, she said quietly, and I promise to earn my keep. I'm no stranger to hard work. Samuel smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. That's settled then. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Ruby Callahan. In the days that followed, Ruby threw herself into work, finding that physical exhaustion was the only thing that allowed her to sleep without nightmares. She helped Martha with cooking, cleaning, mending, and the 1,000 other tasks required to keep a working ranch running smoothly. The activity kept her mind occupied during the day, though grief still claimed her in the quiet moments. The Blackwood Ranch was larger than Ruby had initially realized. Besides Samuel and Martha, there were 6 full-time ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, a young stable boy named Tommy, and a Mexican cook called Miguel who prepared meals for the workers. During roundup or other busy times, Samuel hired additional hands, but with winter settling in, the ranch operated with minimal staff. Ruby rarely saw Samuel during those first weeks. He rose before dawn and often returned after she had retired for the night. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but distant, as though uncertain how to behave around her. Ruby found herself watching for him nonetheless, curious about the man who had so generously offered her sanctuary. One evening in early December, Ruby was mending shirts by the fire in the main house when Samuel came in from the cold, bringing with him the scent of winter air and horses. "Evening, Ruby," he said, hanging his coat and hat on pegs by the door. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged, continuing her stitching. He chuckled softly. "If I'm to call you Ruby, surely you can call me Samuel." Ruby looked up, a small smile touching her lips. "Samuel, then." He came to stand by the fire, warming his hands. In the flickering light, Ruby noted how the flames highlighted the gold in his brown hair and the strength in his profile. He was not conventionally handsome, his features were too rugged, his nose slightly crooked from a break, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. "How are you settling in?" he asked, glancing down at her. Ruby considered her answer carefully. "Well enough. Martha has been very kind and the work keeps me occupied." Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And the grief, does it ease at all?" The directness of the question startled her. Most people avoided mentioning her loss as though speaking of it might somehow make it worse. "Some days are better than others," she admitted. "The nights are hardest." "Yes," he said simply, and in that one word, Ruby heard understanding born of experience. "You lost your parents as well," she remembered aloud. Samuel nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "My mother when I was 10, my father 5 years ago. Different circumstances, same emptiness afterward." He looked down at her. "It never goes away completely, but it does change. Becomes something you can carry without buckling under the weight." The insight touched Ruby deeply. Thank you for saying that. Most people offer empty platitudes about time healing all wounds. Time doesn't heal wounds, Samuel said, his voice low and rich in the quiet room. It just gives us the strength to bear them. He straightened, seeming almost embarrassed by the personal turn of the conversation. I came to tell you that I'm riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Is there anything you need? Ruby thought of her meager possessions, the borrowed clothes, the single locket. I don't have money for consider it an advance on your wages, Samuel interrupted gently. Ruby hesitated, then nodded. Perhaps some fabric for a dress or two, and thread. I can sew my own clothes if I have the materials. Of course, write down what you need and I'll do my best. He paused, then added, would you like to come along? The journey might do you good. The unexpected invitation brought a genuine smile to Ruby's face. I would like that very much. The following morning dawned clear and cold. Ruby dressed in her warmest borrowed clothes and waited by the barn, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Samuel appeared leading a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses, a third horse the chestnut stallion she remembered from their first meeting tethered behind. Good morning, he called, helping her up onto the wagon seat. He tucked a heavy buffalo robe around her legs before climbing up beside her. It's about 2 hours to town if the roads aren't too bad. As they set off, the rising sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Despite the cold, Ruby found herself enjoying the journey, the simple pleasure of seeing new sights after weeks confined to the ranch. Samuel proved to be a surprisingly good conversationalist when given the chance. He told her about the history of the ranch, how his father had come west as a young man and built it from nothing, about his dreams for expanding their cattle operation in the coming years. What about you? He asked eventually. What brought your family out west from Boston? Ruby smiled wistfully. My father's dreams of silver. He was a bookkeeper in Boston, but he always yearned for adventure. When he heard about the silver strikes in Colorado, he convinced my mother it was our chance for a better life. She sighed. He was never much of a miner, but he loved the freedom of the West. And you, did you share his love for this country? Ruby considered the question seriously. At first, I hated it. I missed my friends, my books, the concerts and shops of Boston. She gestured to the vast landscape around them. But over time, I came to appreciate the beauty here, the openness. There's a kind of honesty to this land that I've grown to love. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. It gets in your blood. The town of Silver Creek was smaller than Ruby remembered from her infrequent visits with her parents. A single main street was lined with essential businesses: general store, blacksmith, saloon, small hotel, and a church at the far end. Several side streets contained modest homes and a schoolhouse. Samuel parked the wagon in front of the general store and helped Ruby down. Mr. Patterson runs this place, he explained as they entered. Fair prices, and he carries just about everything you might need. The store was warm and smelled of coffee, spices, and leather. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to tools, fabrics to firearms. A portly man with mutton chop whiskers looked up from behind the counter. Samuel Blackwood, haven't seen you in nearly a month. His curious gaze shifted to Ruby. Mr. Patterson, this is Miss Ruby Callahan, Samuel introduced her. She's working at the ranch now, helping Mrs. Winters. Recognition dawned in the shopkeeper's eyes. Callahan, I heard what happened out at your place. Terrible business. He shook his head solemnly. My condolences, miss. Thank you, Ruby replied quietly, uncomfortable with the reminder of her loss. Samuel smoothly redirected the conversation. We've come for supplies. I have a list here, and Miss Callahan needs some fabric and sewing notions. While Samuel discussed feed orders and hardware with the shopkeeper, Ruby wandered to the fabric section. She ran her fingers over the various materials: practical cottons and wools mostly, though there were a few lovely pieces of calico and even some ribbon. She selected enough sturdy blue cotton for a work dress and some warmer brown wool for a winter garment, along with necessary threads and buttons. As she was making her selections, the bell over the door jingled, and 3 women entered the store. From their fine clothes and the way Mr. Patterson immediately attended to them, Ruby guessed they were from prominent local families. Mrs. Hughes, Mrs. Darby, Miss Hughes, the shopkeeper greeted them. What can I help you with today? The eldest woman, elegantly dressed despite the frontier setting, glanced toward Ruby with undisguised curiosity. We need supplies for the church Christmas celebration, she announced. Her gaze shifted to Samuel, and her expression warmed considerably. Mr. Blackwood, what a pleasant surprise. Samuel nodded politely. Mrs. Hughes, ladies. Mrs. Hughes advanced toward him, practically dragging her daughter, a pretty young woman of perhaps 18, alongside her. Sophia has been asking after you. You promised to attend our last social gathering but never appeared. Samuel looked distinctly uncomfortable. Ranch business kept me away. My apologies. Mrs. Hughes waved away his excuse. Well, you simply must attend our Christmas party next week. The whole town will be there. Her daughter smiled up at Samuel. Please say you'll come, Mr. Blackwood. You've been away from society for far too long. Samuel glanced at Ruby, who pretended great interest in a spool of thread. Perhaps, he said noncommittally, Mrs. Hughes followed his gaze, her sharp eyes assessing Ruby. And who might this be? She asked, making no effort to include Ruby in the conversation. Samuel moved to Ruby's side. Miss Ruby Callahan. She's recently joined our household staff. The term staff stung Ruby more than it should have. It was accurate. Of course she was an employee, nothing more, but hearing it stated so plainly reinforced the difference in their positions. Callahan, Mrs. Hughes repeated, recognition dawning. Ah yes, the family that was unfortunate. Her tone carried pity tinged with something like disapproval, as though Ruby's family had somehow invited their tragic fate. Miss Callahan is a valued member of the Blackwood Ranch, Samuel said firmly, his voice carrying a warning note that even Mrs. Hughes could not miss. The woman retreated slightly. Of course, how charitable of you to take her in. She turned back to Mr. Patterson. Now, about those supplies. Samuel placed a gentle hand on Ruby's elbow. Have you found everything you need? He asked quietly. Ruby nodded, grateful for his intervention. They completed their purchases, and Samuel loaded the supplies into the wagon while Ruby waited, acutely aware of the curious stares from townsfolk who had heard about the attack on her family's homestead. As they prepared to leave, the young Miss Hughes approached them, a friendly smile on her face. Mr. Blackwood, I do hope you'll reconsider about the Christmas party. Everyone would be so pleased to see you there. She turned to include Ruby in her smile. You would be welcome too, Miss Callahan. The whole town gathers for it. Before Ruby could respond, Samuel spoke. Thank you, Miss Hughes, we'll consider it. On the journey back to the ranch, Ruby was quieter than she had been on the outward trip. Samuel gave her space for a while, then finally asked, Did Mrs. Hughes upset you? Ruby sighed. Not exactly, she simply reminded me of my changed circumstances. She looked down at her worn, borrowed clothes. 6 months ago, I would have been invited to such gatherings as a guest, not as someone's staff, Samuel frowned. I apologize for that choice of words. It seemed the simplest explanation, but it was thoughtless. But accurate, Ruby pointed out. I am your employee. You're more than that, Samuel said firmly. You're a neighbor who's fallen on hard times, eh? He hesitated, a friend, I hope. The sincerity in his voice warmed Ruby. Yes, she agreed softly. A friend. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the horse's steady breathing. Finally, Samuel spoke again. Would you like to attend the Christmas party? We could go together. Ruby looked at him in surprise. Wouldn't that cause talk? The ranch owner and his housekeeper? A hint of stubbornness appeared in Samuel's expression. Let them talk. You deserve some enjoyment after all you've endured. His eyes met hers briefly. Besides, I find these gatherings tedious. Having a friend there would make it more bearable. Ruby considered the offer. Part of her longed for the normalcy of a social event, while another part dreaded facing the town's curiosity and pity. In the end, the first part won. I would like that, she decided. Though I have nothing suitable to wear. Samuel's smile was unexpectedly boyish. I believe we just purchased fabric for new dresses, did we not? The days leading up to the Christmas party were filled with preparations. Ruby worked on her new dress in the evenings after her regular duties were complete, fashioning a simple but elegant garment from the blue cotton. Martha offered advice and assistance, clearly pleased by the growing friendship between Ruby and Samuel. "He's a good man," Martha told Ruby one evening as they sat by the fire, Ruby stitching the final details on her dress. "Too serious sometimes and too isolated these past years. It does my heart good to see him taking an interest in life again." Ruby looked up from her work. "What do you mean?" Martha sighed, setting aside her knitting. After his father died, Samuel threw himself into the ranch, worked from dawn till dusk, barely speaking to anyone beyond what was necessary for business. No social calls, no interest in the young lady's misses. Hughes and others were always pushing in his direction. She shook her head. "A man needs more than work to sustain him." Ruby considered this new information. "He seems content with his life." "Content isn't the same as happy," Martha observed shrewdly. "But lately I've seen glimpses of the boy I remember, curious, kind-hearted, quick to laugh." Her knowing eyes met Ruby's. "That change came with you." Ruby felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends, nothing more." Martha simply smiled and returned to her knitting. "Of course, dear." The night of the party arrived cold and clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Ruby dressed with care, her new blue dress complemented by her mother's silver locket and her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style. She had no mirror in her small room, but Martha assured her she looked lovely. "The blue brings out your eyes," the older woman said approvingly, "and that locket is just the right touch." Ruby touched the locket nervously. "Do you think it's appropriate? For a social occasion, I mean." "It's your mother's locket," Martha said gently. "There's nothing more appropriate than carrying a piece of her with you tonight." When Ruby emerged from her room, Samuel was waiting in the main room of the house, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, with a crisp white shirt and string tie. He turned as she entered, and the appreciation in his eyes sent a flutter through Ruby's stomach. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Ruby dipped her head in acknowledgement, equally struck by his transformation from rugged rancher to polished gentleman. "Thank you." "You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ride to town was magical. Samuel had arranged for a proper sleigh instead of the wagon, complete with bells that jingled merrily as they glided over the snow. He had also brought along extra blankets and heated bricks for their feet, ensuring Ruby's comfort in the cold night air. "I haven't ridden in a sleigh since I was a girl in Boston," Ruby confessed, delighting in the sensation of floating over the snow-covered landscape. Samuel smiled, his breath visible in the cold air. One of the few advantages of a Colorado winter. The town was transformed when they arrived. Lanterns hung from every building, casting a warm glow over the snow-covered streets. Evergreen boughs decorated doorways and windows, and the church at the end of the main street blazed with light and the sound of music. As Samuel helped Ruby from the sleigh, she felt a moment of trepidation. "Everyone will be looking at us." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Let them look. You have nothing to be ashamed of." With his steady presence beside her, Ruby found the courage to enter the church hall, which had been cleared of pews and transformed into a festive gathering space. Tables lined the walls, laden with food and drink. A small group of musicians played in one corner, and several couples were already dancing in the center of the room. Their entrance did indeed cause a stir. Conversations paused momentarily as heads turned in their direction. Ruby felt the weight of curious stares, but Samuel's hand at the small of her back guided her forward with calm assurance. Mrs. Hughes detached herself from a group of ladies and approached them, her daughter in tow. "Mr. Blackwood, how delightful that you decided to join us after all." Her gaze shifted to Ruby, taking in her simple but becoming dress. "And Miss Callahan, what a pleasant surprise." Samuel nodded politely. "Mrs. Hughes, the decorations are lovely. You've outdone yourself." The compliment mollified the woman somewhat. "Yes, well, Christmas is a time for making an effort, isn't it?" She practically pushed her daughter forward. "Sophia has been practicing the pianoforte especially for tonight. Perhaps you'd request a song later." Before Samuel could respond, the town's mayor joined them, a jovial man with a substantial belly and an even more substantial mustache. "Blackwood, good to see you out and about," he nodded to Ruby. "Miss Callahan, I believe. I'm Mayor Wilson, terrible business about your family. The town council has been discussing raising a militia to go after those bandits. That would be a welcome development, Samuel said seriously. The territorial marshals seem overwhelmed these days. The conversation turned to law enforcement and cattle prices, giving Ruby a moment to observe the gathering. Despite the initial awkwardness, most people seemed friendly enough, offering sympathetic nods or smiles when they caught her eye. A few of the older women whispered behind their hands, clearly discussing her presence with Samuel, but Ruby found she cared less than she had expected. "Would you care to dance?" Samuel asked, interrupting her thoughts. Ruby hesitated. "I haven't danced in years. I'm sure to be terribly rusty." "That makes two of us," he said with a small smile. "We can be rusty together." The musicians were playing a simple waltz, the melody sweet and clear in the decorated hall. Samuel led Ruby to the center of the room, placing one hand respectfully at her waist and taking her hand with the other. Despite his claim of rustiness, he moved with natural grace, guiding her confidently through the steps. "You dance very well for a cowboy," Ruby teased as they turned around the floor. Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners. "My mother insisted on lessons when I was young. She said no son of hers would grow up to be a complete savage, ranch or no ranch. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His expression softened with memory. "You would have liked her. She loved books and music, but she was also practical and determined. She could shoot as well as any man and still serve tea with perfect manners afterward." As they danced, Ruby became aware that the stares directed their way had changed in nature. The curiosity remained, but there was something else now: speculation, assessment. She realized suddenly how their appearance together might be interpreted. "People are talking about us," she murmured. Samuel's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Does that bother you?" Ruby considered the question. "It should, I suppose." "My reputation is beyond reproach," Samuel interrupted firmly. "You're here with me, yes, but Mrs. Winters is practically a chaperone and everyone knows you work at the ranch. There's nothing improper about an employer escorting his friend to a community gathering." The slight hesitation before "friend" caught Ruby's attention, but she didn't have time to consider it as the dance ended and they were approached by several of Samuel's business acquaintances, eager to discuss the spring cattle drive. The evening progressed pleasantly. Ruby found herself welcomed by most of the townspeople, who seemed genuinely sympathetic about her loss and curious about her new position at the Blackwood Ranch. She even danced with the mayor and the young schoolteacher, though she noticed Samuel watching her constantly from wherever he stood. As the night wore on, Samuel found her again. "Would you like some air?" he asked, noting her flushed cheeks from dancing. Ruby nodded gratefully, and he led her outside to the church's small porch. The night air was bracingly cold after the warmth inside, but refreshing. The town was quiet, most of its inhabitants at the party, and the stars seemed even brighter than before. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Samuel asked, standing close beside her. "More than I expected to," Ruby admitted. "People have been kind for the most part. They're good people, despite the gossip and small-town curiosities." He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light from the church windows. "Ruby, there's something I wanted to ask you." Her heart beat a little faster at his tone. "Yes." Before he could continue, the door opened behind them, and Sophia Hughes stepped out, her pretty face lighting up at the sight of Samuel. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood, Mother sent me to find you. The mayor is about to make his Christmas speech, and she was certain you wouldn't want to miss it." Her eyes moved to Ruby, acknowledging her presence with a polite nod before returning to Samuel. "Everyone is gathering inside." Samuel looked as though he wanted to refuse, but good manners prevailed. "Of course, we'll be right in." Sophia hesitated, clearly hoping to escort Samuel back herself, but when he offered his arm to Ruby instead, she had no choice but to return alone. "What did you want to ask me?" Ruby inquired as they prepared to go back inside. Samuel shook his head slightly. "It will keep for another time." He smiled down at her. "For now, let's endure the mayor's speech. I hear he's been practicing it for weeks." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of speeches, carols, and more dancing. By the time they left, Ruby was pleasantly tired and filled with a sense of belonging she had not experienced since before her parents' deaths. The sleigh ride home was quieter, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. As they approached the ranch, Samuel finally broke the silence. "What did you think of your first social outing as a resident of Silver Creek?" Ruby smiled in the darkness. "It was lovely. Thank you for convincing me to go." "I noticed Mrs. Hughes introducing her daughter at every opportunity," Ruby added lightly, curious about his reaction. Samuel sighed. "She's been trying to match me with Sophia for 2 years now. The girl is sweet enough, but—" He trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. "But," Ruby prompted. He glanced at her, his expression difficult to read in the dim light of the sleigh's lantern. "Let's just say my interests lie elsewhere." The comment hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning, as they completed the journey to the ranch in companionable silence. The weeks following the Christmas party brought changes to Ruby's place within the Blackwood household. Samuel began inviting her to join him for dinner in the main house rather than eating with Martha in the kitchen. He sought her opinion on ranch matters and took time each evening to sit with her by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking about their respective days. For her part, Ruby found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings more than she cared to admit. Samuel was thoughtful and intelligent, with a dry wit that emerged more frequently as they grew comfortable with one another. He lent her books from his father's library and listened attentively when she spoke of her life in Boston or her dreams for the future. Martha observed these developments with knowing eyes, but made no comment beyond occasionally finding reasons to leave them alone together. The ranch hands noted the changes as well, treating Ruby with increasing deference not as a servant, but as someone of importance to their boss. Winter deepened around them, bringing blizzards that confined everyone to the ranch buildings for days at a time. During one such storm in late January, Ruby was helping Martha preserve the last of the fall apples when Samuel burst into the kitchen, his expression serious. "A rider just made it in ahead of the worst of the blizzard," he announced. "The Reeves gang has been spotted near the Carson place, about 15 miles west." His eyes met Ruby's. "The territorial marshal is gathering men to go after them." Ruby felt her heart constrict with a mixture of fear and vindictive hope. "Will you join them?" Samuel nodded grimly. "I leave at first light tomorrow, assuming the storm has passed. We can't let them continue terrorizing homesteads." That night, Ruby found it impossible to sleep. The thought of Samuel riding out to confront the same men who had murdered her parents filled her with dread. She paced her small room, listening to the howl of the wind outside and imagining all the terrible possibilities. Dawn brought a temporary lull in the storm. Ruby was in the kitchen when Samuel came downstairs, dressed for riding in heavy winter gear, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "The marshal expects about 20 men," he told Martha as she handed him a package of food for the journey. "Should be enough to handle Reeves and his crew if we can find them in this weather." Ruby stood silently by the stove, unable to voice her fears. Samuel turned to her, his expression softening. "We'll be careful," he promised, seeming to read her thoughts, "and with any luck we'll bring these men to justice." "Please be safe," Ruby managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, reaching out to touch her cheek briefly. "I will come back," he said with quiet intensity. "You have my word." After he left, the ranch seemed unnaturally quiet despite the resumed howling of the wind. Ruby went through her daily tasks mechanically, her mind constantly with the posse of men tracking through the snow. Martha tried to distract her with extra baking projects and mending, but nothing could ease her worry. 3 days passed with no word. The storm finally broke, leaving behind drifts of snow taller than a man in some places. On the morning of the 4th day, Ruby was hanging laundry to dry inside the house when she heard shouts from the yard. She rushed to the window to see several riders approaching, and her heart leaped when she recognized Samuel's broad-shouldered figure among them. She was at the door before she realized it, heedless of the cold as she stepped onto the porch. Samuel dismounted stiffly, his face weathered from days in the elements but breaking into a smile when he saw her. "You're back," Ruby said unnecessarily, relief making her voice shake. Samuel handed his reins to one of the ranch hands and climbed the steps to join her on the porch. "I gave you my word," he reminded her gently. Only then did Ruby notice the crude bandage wrapped around his left arm, dark stains visible through the cloth. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he dismissed. "A bullet graze. One of the other men already cleaned it." "Come inside this instant," Ruby ordered, her relief giving way to concern. "Martha will have hot water ready and I'll tend to that wound properly." Samuel allowed himself to be led into the kitchen, where Martha exclaimed over his appearance and immediately began heating water and gathering medical supplies. When she had everything ready, she tactfully withdrew, leaving Ruby to unwrap the makeshift bandage and examine the wound. It was indeed a graze rather than a penetrating wound, but it was deep enough to require careful cleaning and proper dressing. Ruby worked in focused silence, her fingers gentle as she bathed away dirt and blood. "What happened?" she asked finally, applying a healing salve to the angry red line across his upper arm. Samuel's jaw tightened. "We found them holed up in an abandoned mining camp. There was a firefight. 2 of Reeves' men were killed, one of ours wounded badly." He paused. "Reeves himself was captured alive." Ruby's hands stilled. "He's in custody," Samuel nodded. "Being taken to Denver for trial. The marshal has testimonies from several families they've attacked. He'll hang Ruby." A complex wave of emotions washed through her: grief, relief, and a strange emptiness. "Good," she said simply, resuming her task of bandaging his arm. Did he say anything about my parents?" "He denied specific knowledge of individual attacks," Samuel replied carefully. "But one of his men, hoping for leniency, confirmed they were responsible for at least a dozen homestead raids, including yours." Ruby tied off the bandage with steady hands, though her heart was racing. "Thank you for telling me, and for going after them." Samuel caught her hand as she withdrew it from his arm. "I would have hunted them to the ends of the earth for what they did to your family," he said with quiet intensity. "For what they did to you." The naked emotion in his voice made Ruby look up, meeting his gaze directly. What she saw there took her breath away: concern, yes, but also something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster. "Samuel," she began, not entirely sure what she meant to say. He released her hand slowly. "I should rest," he said, his voice rough. "It's been a long few days." Ruby nodded, stepping back. "Of course, I'll have Martha bring you some food in a while." After he left, Ruby remained in the kitchen, her emotions in turmoil. The capture of the Reeves gang should have brought closure, but instead, it seemed to have opened something new inside her: a realization that her feelings for Samuel had grown far beyond friendship or gratitude. That evening, Ruby was sitting alone by the fire in the main room when Samuel joined her. He had rested, bathed, and changed into clean clothes, though weariness still showed in the lines of his face. "How is your arm?" she asked as he settled into the chair opposite hers. "Better, thanks to your care." He studied her for a moment. "Are you all right? It's been an eventful day." Ruby considered the question. "I thought I would feel different knowing they've been caught, more settled, perhaps." "Justice isn't the same as healing," Samuel observed quietly. "One happens in a courthouse, the other in the heart. The second takes much longer." Ruby smiled faintly. "When did you become so wise?" "Experience," he replied simply, "not wisdom." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional low moan of the wind outside. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "Do you remember at the Christmas party I said I had something to ask you?" Ruby looked up, surprised. "Yes, we were interrupted." Samuel leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ruby, spring will be here before we know it. When I offered you a position here, I said you could move on then if you wished, with money saved to start over." He paused. "Is that still your plan?" The question caught her off guard. In truth, Ruby had thought less and less about leaving as the weeks passed. The ranch had become home, its routines familiar and comforting. And Samuel had become essential to her happiness in a way she had not anticipated. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I haven't thought much about it lately." Something like hope flickered in Samuel's eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, because I've been thinking about it a great deal." He took a deep breath. "I don't want you to leave, Ruby, not as an employee, not at all." Ruby's heart began to race. "What are you saying, Samuel?" He rose from his chair and came to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. I'm saying that these past months have shown me what was missing in my life. Not just companionship, but your strength, your kindness, your perspective on the world. His voice grew softer. I find myself looking for you in every room. The days seem brighter when you're near, and the evenings empty when you're not. Tears welled in Ruby's eyes as the meaning of his words became clear. I love you, Ruby Callahan, Samuel said simply. I think I have since that first day, when you stood amid the ashes of your home with a piece of charred wood as your only defense, refusing to surrender to despair. His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. I know this may seem sudden or perhaps inappropriate given our current arrangement, but I cannot keep silent any longer. Ruby struggled to find her voice. It doesn't seem sudden, she managed finally. It feels like the most natural thing in the world. Hope blazed in Samuel's eyes. Then you might consider a different arrangement between us. Not employer and employee, but husband and wife. A tear slipped down Ruby's cheek as joy bloomed in her heart. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would consider that very much. Samuel reached up to brush away her tear, his touch reverent. I cannot promise life will always be easy. The ranch demands much and the West can be harsh. But I can promise you this, you will never again be left with nothing. You will never want for anything I can provide. And you will never doubt that you are loved completely and utterly for as long as I draw breath. Ruby placed her hand against his cheek, marveling at the turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, I stood in the ashes of everything I had ever known, certain my life was over. Now I see it was just beginning, she smiled through her tears. I love you too, Samuel Blackwood, and I would be honored to be your wife. Samuel rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening as Ruby responded, her arms encircling his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Martha will be insufferably pleased with herself, Samuel murmured against Ruby's hair. She's been dropping hints for weeks. Ruby laughed softly. I suspect half the ranch has been waiting for this moment. Let them wait no longer then. Samuel stepped back slightly, though he kept her hands in his. Shall we tell her now? Martha's reaction was indeed one of smug satisfaction rather than surprise. About time, she declared, beaming at them both. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the root cellar to get any results. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Most reactions were positive, though Ruby was aware of some disapproving whispers about the speed of the romance and her previous position in the household. Samuel dismissed such concerns with characteristic directness. Let them talk, he said when Ruby mentioned hearing gossip during a trip to town. We know the truth of our feelings, and that's what matters. They were married on the first day of spring, with the snow melting from the fields and the first green shoots pushing through the soil. The ceremony took place in the Silver Creek Church, with Martha standing proudly as Ruby's witness and Samuel's foreman as his. Ruby wore a new dress of pale blue, silk, a gift from Samuel with her mother's locket at her throat. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, even Mrs. Hughes, who had finally accepted that her matchmaking plans for Samuel and Sophia would never bear fruit. The young schoolteacher played the piano while couples danced, and the mayor made a speech about new beginnings that brought tears to many eyes. Are you happy? Samuel asked as they danced together, now as husband and wife. Ruby looked up at him, her heart full. Happier than I ever thought possible after everything, his arms tightened around her. This is just the beginning, Ruby Blackwood. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. I like the sound of that. As do I, Samuel murmured, bending to kiss her briefly, heedless of the watching townsfolk. Their wedding night was a revelation of tenderness and passion. Samuel's touch was reverent as he helped Ruby out of her wedding finery, his eyes darkening with desire but his hands remaining gentle. For Ruby, who had known only loss and hardship in recent months, the intimacy they shared was a healing balm, a promise of joy returned to her life. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms in what was now their shared bedroom, Ruby traced the lines of his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. What are you thinking? He asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. That life is strange and wonderful. she replied honestly. 6 months ago, I had nothing but the clothes on my back. Now I have everything. Samuel's expression grew serious. You had yourself, Ruby, your courage, your determination to survive. That was never nothing. He kissed her gently. But I'm glad I could add to what you already possessed. Spring turned to summer, and Ruby blossomed in her new role as Samuel's wife and partner. She took an active interest in the ranch operations, learning about cattle and horses, accompanying Samuel on rounds of the property, and keeping the books with the skill inherited from her accountant father. The ranch hands, initially uncertain how to treat the boss's new wife, soon came to respect her practical intelligence and willingness to learn. In the evenings, Ruby and Samuel would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. These quiet moments were Ruby's favorites, Samuel's arm around her shoulders, the day's work complete, the future stretching before them full of promise. I've been thinking, Samuel said during one such evening in late summer. The south pasture would be a good place for a new house. Ruby looked up at him in surprise. A new house? What's wrong with this one? Samuel smiled, running his hand along the porch railing. Nothing. It's served the Blackwood family well for 2 generations, but it's my father's house built to his specifications. His eyes met hers. I'd like us to have our own home, built for our family present and future. The implication warmed Ruby's heart. They had spoken of children, of course, both hoping to fill the ranch with new life someday. I would like that, she agreed softly, though I've grown fond of this place. We wouldn't tear it down, Samuel assured her. Martha could stay here and it would serve as a guest house when needed, but the new place would be larger with a proper library for your books and maybe a music room, he grinned. And a nursery, of course. Ruby leaned against him, contentment washing through her. Of course. Construction on the new house began in the fall, with Samuel hiring the best carpenter from Denver to oversee the project. Ruby threw herself into the planning, working with the carpenter on the layout and details, determined to create a home that would serve their family for generations to come. As winter approached again, Ruby became aware of subtle changes in her body, a new fullness to her breasts, a persistent fatigue in the afternoons, a strange aversion to the smell of coffee that had never bothered her before. She said nothing to Samuel at first, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. When she finally visited the town doctor and received confirmation of her suspicions, Ruby could barely contain her joy. She planned a special dinner that night, with Samuel's favorite dishes and a bottle of wine they had been saving for a special occasion. What's all this? Samuel asked when he came in from the day's work to find the table set elegantly and Ruby dressed in her best gown. A celebration, she replied, her eyes shining. Samuel raised an eyebrow as he washed up. And what are we celebrating? Ruby waited until he was seated across from her, the food served and the wine poured. Life, she said simply, reaching across the table to take his hand. New life, to be precise. It took a moment for her meaning to register, then Samuel's eyes widened. Ruby, are you saying? She nodded, her smile radiant. Dr. Wilson confirms it. We're having a baby, Samuel, next spring. Samuel was out of his chair in an instant, coming around the table to gather her into his arms. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Our baby. Ruby laughed as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. Careful, there are months yet before he or she arrives. Samuel set her down gently, his hands framing her face. You have made me the happiest man in Colorado territory, he declared, kissing her thoroughly. In the entire country, I'd wager. The news of Ruby's pregnancy spread joy throughout the ranch. Martha immediately began knitting tiny garments, while the ranch hands competed to bring Ruby special treats, the first spring berries, a particularly fine trout from the stream, wildflowers gathered during their rounds. The new house was completed just as winter settled in earnest across the land. It stood proud on a slight rise overlooking the south pasture, built of local stone and timber, with wide windows to capture the mountain views and a broad porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, it was everything Ruby had dreamed of, spacious but cozy, with a library filled with books Samuel had ordered from Denver and a nursery painted in soft yellow, awaiting its occupant. Their first Christmas in the new house was a joyous affair. Samuel insisted on cutting the tallest pine tree that would fit in their front room, and Ruby decorated it with ornaments ordered from back east, along with simple handmade decorations crafted by the two of them during the long winter evenings. They hosted dinner for the entire ranch staff, with Martha supervising the cooking and everyone contributing something to the feast. As they prepared for bed that night, Samuel came up behind Ruby as she brushed her hair at the dressing table, his hands gently caressing the small but definite swell of her belly. "Happy?" he asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Ruby set down her brush and covered his hands with her own. "Beyond words," she replied honestly. "Sometimes I wake in the night and can't believe this is my life now, this beautiful home, you beside me, our child growing within me." She turned to face him. From nothing to everything in the span of a year, Samuel drew her to her feet and into his embrace. "You never had nothing, Ruby. You had yourself, your courage, your spirit, your capacity to love despite all you had lost." He kissed her tenderly. "I am simply fortunate that you chose to share those gifts with me." Their son was born on a perfect spring day, with the mountains still capped with snow but the ranch lands greening with new life. They named him James, after Ruby's father, with William as his middle name in honor of Samuel's father. He had Samuel's blue eyes and a dusting of Ruby's auburn hair, and from his first breath, he was the center of their world. Standing by the nursery window one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky as Ruby nursed their son in the rocking chair Samuel had crafted himself, Ruby felt a sense of completion she had never known was possible. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, coming to stand beside her, his arm slipping around her waist. Ruby leaned into his solid warmth. "That life is a circle," she said softly. "A year ago, I stood in a different window, watching a different sunset, wondering what my future held." She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "I could never have imagined this." Samuel kissed her forehead gently. "The best parts of life are often the ones we cannot imagine beforehand." Ruby nodded, looking back at their son, now sleeping peacefully against her breast. "When I lost my parents, lost our home, I thought I had nothing left but the rags on my back." She smiled at the memory of their first meeting, of Samuel's steady presence during her darkest hour. "I never dreamed that from those ashes would rise a life so rich in love." Samuel's arm tightened around her. "And that, my dearest Ruby, is only the beginning." As the years passed, the Blackwood Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Samuel's cattle operation expanded, while Ruby established a small horse breeding program that became known throughout the territory for its quality stock. James was joined by a sister, Margaret, and later by another brother, Thomas. The house that Samuel had built for their beginning family filled with laughter, learning, and love. Ruby never forgot where she had come from, the tragic loss that had brought her to this life. Each year, on the anniversary of her parents' deaths, she and Samuel would ride out to their graves, now marked with proper headstones on a peaceful rise overlooking the mountains. She would place wildflowers on the stone and tell her parents about their grandchildren, about the happiness she had found despite everything. And each year, on the anniversary of the day they met, Samuel would present Ruby with a single silver rose, a reminder of the locket that had survived the destruction, of the woman who had risen from ashes to build a new life beside him. It was their private celebration, a recognition of the journey from desperate beginnings to abiding joy. In time, their children grew to understand the story of their parents' unusual meeting, how a tragedy and an act of kindness had blossomed into a love that sustained not just a family, but an entire ranch community. They learned from their mother's resilience and their father's compassion, carrying those lessons into their own lives as they matured. Ruby's silver locket, containing miniature portraits of her parents, remained her most treasured possession. As the decades passed and her hair began to show strands of silver to match it, she added tiny images of her children and eventually her grandchildren, creating a tangible link between past and future. On their 30th anniversary, with their children grown and the ranch more prosperous than ever, Samuel took Ruby's hand as they sat on the porch of the home they had built together. "I was right, you know," he said, his voice still strong despite the years. Ruby smiled at him, the lines around her eyes deepening with genuine happiness. "About what, my love?" "That day in the nursery when James was just born." Samuel's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, a gesture unchanged by time. "I said it was only the beginning." Ruby leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the mountains in the same magnificent colors it had for all the years they had shared this view. "The best beginning I could have imagined," she agreed softly. From nothing but rags to a life rich in love, it was a journey Ruby Blackwood would never take for granted, and a story that would be told in their family for generations to come.